All right, wealth builders, pretty common question I get is how did you become successful? The answer to that is always the exact same. If you don't believe in this answer, then quite honestly, you could just turn off this video, don't watch this because it's not going to make any sense to you. But this entire idea of how you become successful is based on one thing, and we covered it in actually the introductory course of the 13th grade, which is knowledge equals success. And that should be pretty easy for most people to get their mind around. We go to college, right, to get education and to get knowledge so that hopefully we get a better job and we can become successful. Even if you were, developed an app or something like that, you had to have some sort of app, some sort of knowledge to get there. If you wanted to start a business, again, you need knowledge to do that. I wouldn't call winning the lottery or inheriting money to be necessarily successful. That's a solid win, but it's not necessarily going to be successful or qualify you as being successful. You just got a lot of money for free. So the premise I just want to make sure you understand is education equals success, and education kind of comes in two different forms. If you remember the pain avoidance curve video that we talked about, you get it through either books, just traditional education, college seminars like this or courses like this, and secondary to that, you get it through experience. The combination of those is really where wisdom comes in, of both books and then applying what you learn in books in actual experience. That is actually what builds wisdom. Now in financing, how quickly you learn, how quickly you become financially literate matters. And this is why the 13th grade is really targeted towards the younger generation. People still, 18, 19, 20, early 20s, maybe even late 20s, because the earlier you get started, the more likely you are to sort of benefit from that thing called compounded interest, which is when your money starts to sort of snowball and get larger and larger simply by just having invested in the right things. If you invest money at 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, the amount of returns on investment that you're going to get from that $1 or $100, whatever you have invested, is going to be completely different. The earlier you start investing, the more likely or the greater that money is going to start to snowball. So this concept that we're going to talk about today is something called compressing time. And what compressing time means is basically shrinking what the traditional route would go as far as education, experience, and gaining wisdom in a subject. How do you compress that time? How do you get sort of 15 years or 20 years of knowledge and experience? How can I get that right now? Well, that's very simple. You got to get educated about it. You can learn basically two different ways. You can either learn from other people, right? Or you can actually go all in. And I want to cover those two things. So learning from other people is what you're doing right now. So you take somebody that has experience in something, that's maybe gone to school in a given subject, or has maybe applied whatever it is that they've learned for 10, 15, 20 years of trial and error. In this case, starting businesses, winning, failing. In this case, investing. You've learned from that person and they sort of teach you what they've learned. What that keeps you from is you having to sort of experience it yourself. Or you can go all in. And what I mean by all in, and that's really highly not recommended, is you can just simply say, I don't care. I'm not going to be shy about it. I'm just going to go all in and I'm going to create speed. And speed shrinks time. And so if you go all in and you're just really going at it, or you put a lot of effort behind it, that's kind of going all in, you're going to learn that much quicker. Just think about anything. If you decide to learn a sport and you go out twice a week, versus if you go out 7 days a week, if you go spend 1 hour a week practicing versus spending 8 hours a week practicing, the person that's going to spend 8 hours a week practicing 7 days a week is going to learn that thing a lot quicker than somebody that's just going twice a week. So that's the kind of idea of all in. All in also in financing might be, hey, I'm going to go do some day trading. I'll start off with the $25,000 sort of initial investment. You're going to learn a little bit. You're going to buy, maybe you buy a couple of shares, you sell a little bit, you kind of tiptoe into it. Or if you say, no, I'm just going to go all into it and I'm just going to start moving, while the risk is severely escalated at that point, you're actually going to learn a lot quicker. So in finance, unfortunately, you can't do this one, all in, or at least it's just not recommended. So the only way that you can sort of really compress your time when it deals with financing is just to learn from someone else, and you probably understand that, which is why you're watching this video. So I just want you to understand the concept and just to really understand why it's so valuable for you to take this on and to really put your mind into it and sink your mind around it right now. The typical person from 18 to 25 to 40 to 65 follows a typical journey. You graduate high school, maybe you decide to go to college, but for a certain period of your life, your knowledge comes from just reading books, just studying. There's not a whole lot of experience there because you don't even have the baseline knowledge to then go implement. So you spend, let's call it in here, we're just going to call that your college years. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to college, but there's going to be some type of education where you're reading. And, we're going to call that for between 18 to 25 for most people. And that would be indicative of you graduating high school. Maybe you take a year off. Maybe you go directly into college. You spend about 4 years there. Maybe you get a bachelor's degree. Maybe you get a master's degree. You come out of that. You just start working. But really, most of the knowledge that you've gained up until this point is going to be all from books. What happens is when you graduate and you actually go get your first job, you start to implement some of that what you learned. So in my degree, it was in architecture, so I learned a little bit about building houses. And while I was book smart about it, I never had the experience. I never applied what I learned. So what happens after you graduate, you usually start working. And you get into this period is called experience or implementation. And what you're doing here is you're actually applying it. So now I've learned a little bit in books, but now I'm actually going out and doing it. And that application is sort of the real world experience, the education that you get of like, does this actually work? What sounds really good in books and theory isn't necessarily, we all know, isn't necessarily how it actually is out in the real world. So this experience of this implementation part for that 10, 15 years is very important. And just as like a side note, it depends on kind of where you are in your career, but you can do this. Go to like Indeed.com or Career Builder, wherever you'd go search for a job, and type in a title of like CEO or Vice President or Senior Vice President for a job. Like type in Senior Vice President for Sales or Director of Accounting, a high status. And what you're going to see is they're going to say, you know what? I'm looking for somebody with 15 years of experience. And the reason why those higher level positions are looking for somebody that's been in the market for 10, 15 years is because they realize you've educated yourself for a certain period of time, but now they want to see you with 10, 15 years experience because they know if you have that amount of time and experience that you're going to have gone through a lot of things and you're going to make less mistakes when they're hiring you or at their position. So the books and experience after that, once you've gained a pretty good knowledge, and usually in careers, for you that are sort of at my age, at 40, you realize there's a jump that usually happens in that later to 30 to 40, which is sort of your last career shift or your last sort of status or title that you'll have in a career. So what happens is you educate yourself, you get the 10 to 15 years of experience, and if you're doing well and you're being productive, you get that next job, which is going to be that higher job, VP, director, that type of thing. And what you're doing there is what we call the growth spot. And what growth is generally your knowledge from books plus your experience. You're putting all that together. You're actually getting wisdom, and now you're really starting to apply that wisdom. It's at this stage where you start to actually create potentially something new. I call it connecting the dots. And when you start to do that, start applying everything you learned, all your experience, and that's where really kind of great things happen in your career. It's also really where great things happen in your investing if you take the traditional route. What most of us do as far as our financial standpoint, and again, this is why we created the 13th course, is you go through college and you're really not thinking anything about financing whatsoever. You know a little bit. You know some things about credit cards because you got one in college. You're at game day or whatever, and they said, hey, I'll give you a free shirt if you sign up for those credit cards, so you got it and you're charging that. Maybe you've gotten a car note, so you know a little bit about credit scores and things like that, because when you had to go apply for a loan or something, they told you, hey, your credit score is good or bad. But then when you start to get in your 25 and your 35, sort of in this period, you get a little bit more conscious, because at that point in time, maybe you have kids on the way. Maybe you start to save for their college. You're probably looking to buy a house at this point. So this idea of credit and interest rates and things like that start to actually become more prevalent to you. And it's really after that 15-year period, when you start reaching 40, 45 years old, where most of us sit back, we turn around and we say, wait a minute, I got this mortgage and I have car notes and I got the kids that are going to this college, and you know what, I haven't even really saved. So you start to see, and what I did is you take and you sit here at this particular age and you go back and you look back and you say, man, if I would have done something different at the age of 18, or if I would have done something, made a different decision at the age of 25, I could have been in a much better position. That's over here. So the rich, if you are a self-made millionaire, or you're first generation rich, and what that means is basically you started off with not a whole lot, and through your lifetime you became successful. Usually you take on that journey, and then as you become successful, you turn around to your kids and you say, listen, hey, I made some bad moves or whatever, don't do those things, and you bestow sort of that knowledge onto your kids. Remember, we talked about the privilege of being wealthy. What the wealthy do is they start even in here, and they start teaching their kids at 18, 20, hey, don't do these types of things. So with the financial literacy, where that helps out, and this goes against for all trades, the best thing you can do is find yourself an amazing mentor to go behind. If you're going to be a plumber or electrician or accountant, if you have a really good mentor that teaches you a lot, whether it be when you're early on in college or when you get out, what they're doing is they're compressing your time, because they're giving you so much of their experience knowledge and a little bit of their wisdom. So in finance, this is absolutely critical. This is why we launched the course, because in finance, education, right? Your knowledge to your success, and also the amount of money that you're entering in, and the compounded interest grows over time. What happens is, if you don't ever start really thinking about financing or investing until you're somewhere, let's say in your let's say mid-30s, or you're in 40s. For some people, it's actually over when you're 55. What happens is that you get to this point right here, and you never make it. If you go back to our State of America video, you'll notice that we talked about 4 out of 5 people are living paycheck to paycheck. The reason why is they've gotten themselves in such a hole in this period, and now at 40, 45, they're like, man, I should have gotten all that credit card debt, I should have consumed less, I should have spent, I should have invested or whatever. It's already too late, because you've already started that. And so people start thinking about here, and they're like, hey, I got to save for retirement. I can't rely on Social Security. It's not going to be there. But by that time, it's too late. So remember the stats in what we talked about. 42% of Americans have no retirement whatsoever. That's a pretty bad stat. So what we want to do with the 13th grade, and the purpose of this course, is to take all of this experience that I have, basically, that you're getting from me and from other people, because we're going to recommend books and podcasts and things like that. You're going to get even more so because of our refinement in our growth period, where we were pretty successful, because we have the experience from the growth, right? We know what actually happened, because we applied the principles and we saw what happened, and we're like, hey, that really worked out. What we're doing for you is we're taking all of our experience and all the refinement, and we're shrinking that, and we're saying, you know what, you're not going to have to do this experience. You're not going to have to do this growth. You actually have to do a little bit of this books, but versus you having to go out and read 10, 15, 20, 30 different books and read a bunch of podcasts and do all this kind of stuff that I've done over the last decade. What we do here is we're going to give you exactly just the stuff that you need. So your education here is 12 weeks of just some basic knowledge. And we encourage you obviously to spend the next year going through the stuff that we're going to teach, but you'll have gained all this knowledge here, and then you can immediately start to apply those principles in here and make this your experience, and that makes this refinement and growth so much more. So the idea of the 13th grade, and with all courses and all education, is to compress your time of learning so that you can get more of the part of experience and growth. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And it just, this doesn't necessarily apply to anything about you becoming financially free or successful or anything like that in regards to learning some new, investing tip or something like that. But I really just wanted you to sort of think about why you take on education, why you need to stick with this, why you need to dive in 100%. The more information that you can consume in your 18, 19, 20, 30-year-olds, or where you can get your mindset correctly, the more information you can contain there, the quicker your mindset's going to be correct, the quicker you're going to put stuff into place, and the quicker you're going to get to the growth spot, and you're going to benefit from compounded interest in your investments growing.